Welcome to Pivot Point Strategy for Change. I'm Nik Michael. A few weeks ago, I sat down with two recruiters who have spent more than 20 years on the side of the hiring table. Kim Steiner and Amy Krause of Fource Recruiting work every day inside the gap between what candidates believe about themselves and what employers actually experience when they walk through the door or log into the screen. What came out of that conversation was more candid than I expected and more useful. So today, I want to do something different, and I want to move right into going back to that episode and to the conversation I had and pull out the moments that I think matter most. The things every Gen Z job seeker needs to hear and every parent of a Gen Z job seeker needs to understand. Here is what I keep coming back to after that conversation. The gap between where this generation is and where they need to be is not primarily a credentials gap. It's not about the degree they chose or the GPA they finished with. It is something more specific and more fixable. I'm going to walk you through 5 moments from that conversation. I will set each one up and let Kim and Amy give you my read on what it actually means. The first thing I wanted to understand was simple. Not what the job description says, but what actually moves the needle when a real human being is deciding whether your resume makes the cut. I asked Kim and Amy, when you are sitting across from a Gen Z candidate, what are you actually hoping to see? Kim went somewhere I did not expect. She brought it home, literally. She had a recent graduate living under her own roof, and what she shared from that experience set the tone for everything that followed.
Well, in my opinion, I think what oftentimes, and I can say this because I have a recent grad who just graduated 2 weeks ago.
Wonderful, congratulations.
Living in my home, thank you. And just in speaking with her, but also speaking with her friends and classmates, I think what they think matters is in some ways the presence that you put out there all the time. They're very social media centric, and they're very much about building clout, or some, not all. I should definitely preface that. Some are very concerned about building the clout and sort of having that be their lead, and not necessarily, so having that speak for them, but not necessarily doing some of the fundamentals. I think what still matters is being prepared for your interviews, not relying on things like AI, really doing your homework, but also being comfortable with engaging with the hiring manager or the recruiter that's contacting you. Because again, these are people who grew up at a time where social interaction wasn't as fluid as it was when you, Nick, Amy, and I all grew up. So it's that. And sometimes it's like, I don't want to take the next step to ask for the business or to ask the hiring manager, am I still being considered, because they're not as comfortable. But people really do need to take that, because people want to hire candidates that want to get hired, but also ones that have done a lot of the fundamentals, that homework, or those basics that I grew up with, and I no doubt I assume you grew up with as well. So I don't know your thoughts, Amy.
Yeah, I would agree. I would think that a lot of folks coming out of college now think that they're just going to get the job, that the job is there. They're on it. They're cool. They're doing the work. They went to college. Everybody's hiring. So why won't you hire me? So I think that there's also sort of being thoughtful about what makes me different. Why does a company want to hire me? And again, kind of having to do the homework to be hired and to show who you are and show your personality. And also, I think they think it's a little bit easier than it has been kind of in the past to that point. It's not that it was easier, but it's a client's market. So therefore, you really do need to make yourself stand out, and I'm not sure they really realize.
What Kim and Amy are both describing is something that doesn't show up on a resume. It is not a credential. It is not a major. It is the ability to show up as a prepared, engaged human being, someone who has done the homework, who can make eye contact, who is not performing confidence, but actually demonstrating it. And here is what struck me most. They're not describing something out of reach. These are learnable behaviors. The candidate who practices them before they walk into that room is the candidate who moves forward. The one who is banking on their social presence, their clout, their curated online identity, without doing the fundamentals, is the one who doesn't get the callback. That is the first truth. I'm curious from both of you, when you're sitting across from a Gen Z candidate or on the other side of Zoom nowadays, what are you actually hoping to see? Not what the job description says, but what would make either of you put that resume up on the top of the pile? What do you see that you're saying, oh, okay, this stands out? What is it? Is it a soft skill? Is it a major? Is it a university? What is it that separates someone?
So, and I think I heard you say it when I'm on Zoom. And so if you bring that into it,
yeah,
that actually matters more than anything. So I think that no matter what, if I'm speaking to somebody that I have spoken to somebody, recent graduate, and if they're sitting on their bed in their laptop, right, talking to me, I'm not sure that that's necessarily appropriate. So when you say, what are you looking for and what stands out, you're not going to have a lengthy resume at this stage. However, what you will have is who you are as a person, who you are as just being an adult and coming across and being articulate, being able to feel comfortable with talking about who you are, what you're looking for in a job, being able to describe what you graduated with, what did you study at school. Those things are important, I think, initially. And then when you talk about the actual resume itself and somebody's background, you can do a lot while you're at school. You can be proactive. Maybe you did an internship that was, in line with what you want to do in your career. So I think more than ever, it's being buttoned up, having a good personality, coming off as genuine, and have prepared, have some things that you've done at school while you went to school, preparing you for the workforce.
This next moment came directly out of a story I shared about a young man who had been interviewing, couldn't figure out why he wasn't getting called back, and finally got some honest feedback from a hiring manager. The answer surprised his mother, and it will probably surprise some of you, because what looked like distraction, what read as disinterest or even arrogance in the room, was actually preparation gone wrong. He had two screens. He was reading the questions off of one screen, and off the second one, he was looking at the interviewer. And nobody in that interview knew that. They just saw someone who wasn't fully present. I asked Kim and Amy, can you tell when that's happening? And what does it actually cost a candidate?
And what I would add is that I don't want, especially on Zoom, now there oftentimes people have all their notes scripted out on another screen. And when I'm talking to someone, I can tell if someone is reading answers. Oftentimes that's something that from my perspective, I want to be engaging with you. And if I feel that you're looking off or reading, that is something that for me is a red flag, because it says that it's just a red flag. And I think that that's something that oftentimes people do because they're, again, they're not comfortable. They may not have all those stories, but that's definitely for me, the eye contact, that rapport, but not having everything scripted.
So I'm struck by what you said, because I was going to give this example later. And I have a colleague whose son finished in school and had been interviewing. He had some experience, but he was interviewing for positions and he kept not getting. And she finally recommended, call that person back, call the personal person back, and asked him, what kind of tips, what kind of pointers can you give me? What happened? What did I do? And the gentleman was very nice when he was trying to explain it to him. He goes, you came across very sincere. You were definitely nervous. Okay. You didn't look as motivated or animated, but that might be his flat affect. Okay. And then he said, you seem not as, when you asked questions to us, you were looking over to the left and you weren't keeping eye contact. And his mother told me, because he's got two screens and he was reading the question off the screen. And he said, everyone thought you would like distracted. And, I'm wondering whether or not this young man fell trapped to one of those stereotypes that most Gen Z people, and I was going to bring up some stereotypes to talk about, and it was one of the most valuable lessons because then he was better prepared and he had his questions ready and he wasn't, getting distracted and he was like looking straight and forward. So that's just such a striking, recommendation to bring up. So you see this a lot?
I don't personally see it as much as I see that from, frankly, more experienced people. So it's not that I don't see it at all. And it could be somebody who gave a Gen Z person, right, the wrong advice in terms of preparing, because I see it less from them as I do. And I've seen it most recently in some candidates I've had out into the marketplace, because those are habits that I think come on. To me, it comes back to just be who you are, be genuine. Nobody's expecting you to have conquered the world. You're just graduating. And so I will stick with that advice because I think that's what's going to attract a company to you.
Amy said something I want to make sure lands. Be who you are. Nobody expects you to have conquered the world. You're just graduating. That is not lowering the bar. That is actually the bar. Kim named it directly. Reading off a second screen is a red flag, not because preparation is wrong, but because it signals something to the person across you. It says, I am not fully here. I am managing this interaction rather than being inside of it. The fix is not complicated. Practice your answers until they are yours. Know your own story well enough to tell it without notes. Show up to the screen the same way you show up to a room. That single shift from managed to present changes how you read every time. I want to address something that comes up in every conversation I have with parents about their Gen Z kids, and it is the question underneath every other question. Did they choose the right major? Is the degree worth what we paid for it? Will any of this actually translate into a job? I pulled up a slide from the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report, published in 2025, showing that employers expect nearly 40% of required workplace skills to change by 2030. The top skills on that list were not technical, they were not analytical thinking, resilience, adaptability, creative thinking, or lifelong learning. I asked Kim and Amy what skills matter more right now than any specific major or credential. What they said next is what I want every parent and every Gen Z listener to sit with. My question to you is, what skills are most valuable right now than any specific major or credential? I'll leave it on the screen.
Yeah, it's funny that you brought this up because I've experienced this again several times just in the last few days. And when I speak to my clients, and we've been trying to fill several roles recently with clients of ours, and what comes back often, and again, this is from Gen Z, you're just graduating or you've been in the workforce. It's those intangibles. It's these types of skills that I am hearing over and over again. We hear the term culture, but take it deeper to what you just said. So what I'm hearing and what is, I think, extremely important is being confident, but being humble. So it's also really important because I think people think they need to come in like, I'm your person. You got to hire me tomorrow. I'm the best thing since sliced bread, rather than, okay, I'm really confident, but I don't know everything. I'm seeing that skill set now more than ever being extremely critical. People, you've always heard that questions say a lot about who you are. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I hear that that's an important skill set because that doesn't show that you're lacking in ability. It shows that you really have the ability because you're asking questions. So I think those types of skill sets are more important now than ever. How are you going to fit into the company? How are you going to get along with others? How do you work in a group setting? You don't need to be the smartest person in the room, that's not the kind of person that companies are looking to hire, in my opinion, and what I'm hearing more from my clients.
Yeah, and I would also say thinking about the business, thinking oftentimes and this could be true for Gen Z or older people, but if you haven't thought about a client, if you're not always thinking of what can I do for you and how can I solve your problem. So confidence definitely goes, but it's I'm hiring you to help my business. So knowing how to move, business forward. And I think the idea of being analytical certainly is there, because it doesn't mean you have to be, competent from a mathematical standpoint. It means that you need to really sit and do and think about things. And then, as Amy said, fit. I mean, the culture, the fit issue is, oftentimes we hear they weren't a cultural fit, but it's would I want to sit next to this person, as we're now more people are back in the office. Would I want to sit next to this person or in the same, go out for a drink and 2 or 3 days, not that you're drinking 2 or 3 days a week, but go, sitting and working with someone with that as well.
Yeah. And then finally, to kind of take off on what you're saying, is that we also hear a lot is be proactive, be organized. And those are some of those analytical pieces. And so you need to come to the table ready and excited and wanting to be there, because I think oftentimes, and sometimes that could be, I've seen that more with the younger generation is, they're coming in. I'm not saying it's coming off as lazy, but come in there with, I'm excited. I'm here. I'm proactive. I want to learn. I don't know everything, but I am organized and I am going to pay attention and I am going to be part of this team. And I think that's extremely important.
Confident, but humble. Proactive, organized, someone who asks questions not because they don't know, but because they understand that asking is itself a sign of capability. Amy added something I think is worth repeating. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room. That's not what companies are hiring for right now. Kim took it further. Are you thinking about the business? Are you coming in asking how I can solve your problem? Or are you coming in asking, what can this company do for me? That orientation, outward rather than inward, is what separates the candidates who move forward from the ones who don't. And it has nothing to do with your GPA. Every professional I have had on this series has come back to some version of this same list. The credential opens the door. The human skills determine what happens once you walk through it. I want to speak directly to the parents now, because what comes next is the part of this conversation that I think is hardest to hear and the most necessary. We have spent time talking about what Gen Z is getting wrong, and that conversation matters, but there is another conversation underneath it, one about what is happening at home before the resume gets sent, before the interview gets scheduled. I asked Kim and Amy about expectations, salary, remote work, flexibility, and whether Gen Z is being realistic about what entry level actually looks like. What started as a question about the job market became something much closer to home. Kim made a distinction I had not heard framed quite this way before, about earlier Gen Z versus the graduates coming out right now, and what COVID actually did and did not do to their relationship with work. And then Amy went somewhere that I think every parent in this audience needs to hear. One of the most anxious conversations happening in families right now, and I hear constantly in my clinical work, is about the major, the degree, the investment. Parents are paying significant money, whether it's in a private university or state school, and they want to know, does this choice actually matter? Will my child be able to build a career with this degree? Kim answered this one personally. She studied art history, classically one of the least practical majors a student can choose. And what she shared about how she turned that into a career and what she has watched her own daughters do with their degrees is something every parent needs to hear. Amy brought it back to what the research and her experience actually show. And together, they draw a picture of what the degree does and what it doesn't in today's market. How do we support parents who are trying to support their kids in choosing a major that will, in college, that will provide them with, a life, a salary, something, because we have a lot of kids who are looking for that dream job. And I'm going to flash up another, because what I notice, if I don't pull something up, young people are visual learners as well as auditory, but primarily recently in the last 15 years. And I do think it's because just the devices that we use, the iPhone, the Chromebook, it just becomes, so what if the major, what is the major? I mean, that's what we're looking at. Careers are becoming less linear. Skills and experiences are often matter more than the title of the degree. The first job is increasingly not the final destination. So we have a college major, the first job, they pivot again, they find a career. How should students think about choosing a major in today's economy, and how much does that choice actually matter? And I'm bringing this up as a parent, but parents are paying top dollar, as you know, and even if they're going to state or city here in New York, you're having a level of investment. And in today's economy, we can go there later, but what should students think about when choosing a major?
I mean, I can jump in because I myself had one of the least practical majors, which was art history. And oftentimes that's the one that's classically cited as the least practical one of the least. Philosophy is another one that you can have. And what I was fortunate to do, and this is where my parents my mom directed me, and the way I've sort of tried to direct my children is thinking about, I felt that I was really lucky that I got to do something I was passionate about. But I understood and where the support came as a parent was my parents, and as I've done with my children, have helped to try to inform the fact that regardless of what I did as a major, I really tried to get a solid resume before I graduated from college. Not everybody can. I was, again, just I worked at CBS as my first job because I got an internship there. But that was something that happened through my parent. I have one daughter who graduated in public health. She's now in digital media and marketing. So I don't know whether this is good or bad advice. I know a lot of parents who were parents of engineers who thought that or had seen that as one of the recession-proof careers because things are moving so quickly. Perhaps that's not, it's not what it used to be. But I would say going to college is a tremendous luxury. We know that. And not everybody has the ability to have their children sort of go and find themselves. But I also think that as a parent, you need to understand this is the last time that your child will have an opportunity to learn just for the sake of learning. And I do think that more and more companies are looking for well-rounded students. In tech, we'll use tech as an example. Oftentimes people who are in tech don't get hired because they may only be very sort of, tech centric and not people centric, and people hire people. So I personally don't know how to advise, my other daughter was a psych major. She's not doing anything with her major, but she is doing something with her minor, which is in music business. So anecdotally, I can look in my house and my life. So, don't use my opinion as gospel. But what I have seen is that at least the circle of friends that I have, no matter what their children are doing, they're doing because they're passionate, but they're also very focused when it comes to the next step in terms of helping build a resume before they even get out of college.
So well put. That brings me to another question, I want to bring something up. Passion versus aptitude. Employers are increasingly ranking analytical thinking, resilience, and adaptability above specific technical knowledge alone, as you just mentioned. So what the research shows, passion often follows competence, not the other way around. People frequently become interested in activities they become skilled at. Long-term success usually emerges where interests and abilities overlap. So here we have, right here in the center, sustainable career growth, what you're good at compared to what you love. What's the difference between passion and aptitude, and which should a young person lead with early in their career?
Amy?
Yeah, I would say, it can go either way. So what I mean by that is, I had a sister who her passion was to be a teacher. She was going to be a teacher when she was in 5th grade. My sister went on to be a teacher, and she went to college, graduated cum laude, and started her own school. So I think when we think of things like that, right, or we think about those people who have in them that they know they're going to be a doctor or a nurse, right, or the clear or a lawyer or those kinds of roles, not necessarily the kinds of things that we're talking about here today. And I think that is very specific, and that's where a passion is extremely important and very critical. And young people, some young people have that figured out pretty early on. Then there's what Kim talked about, and I was similar. I did not graduate in advertising sales or where I ended up. However, what I did major in was sociology, was kind of criminal justice, people. So I ended up still leaning into who I was as a person and where the job took me to logically. So I think those are very evenly split between what is passionate, what's your aptitude. At the end of the day, to me, college in and of itself is just an experience, as we keep saying here. And so for most people, they don't know what that exact role is going to be when they get out. And so that's where those other softer skills, the human skills, the adaptability, the ability to end up doing something that you had no clue you were going to do. So it's not an easy answer.
Kim said something I want to highlight for every parent listening. College is a tremendous luxury, and it may be the last time your child has the opportunity to learn just for the sake of learning. That is not an argument against practical thinking. It is an argument for perspective. What both Kim and Amy are saying underneath the major conversation is this: the degree is not the primary asset. The resume you build while you are getting the degree is the asset. The internship you pursue, the experience you accumulate, the proactive choices you make before you walk across that stage. A public health degree that leads to digital media, an art history major who ends up placing talent at the highest levels of the industry, a sociology graduate who builds a career in recruiting. The through line in every one of those stories is not the major. It is the person who stayed curious, stayed focused, and kept building something. That is the message for every parent who is lying awake worrying about what their child chooses to study. Here is a question I hear from parents regularly and from Gen Z young adults themselves, usually in a more anxious form. What does it mean if I have already changed direction 2 or 3 times? Does that pattern say something is wrong with me? And how does that recruiter actually read a resume that doesn't tell a straight story? I shared a concept from recent workforce research about what is being called the career lily pad. The idea that Gen Z is moving from role to role the way you cross lily pads on a pond, not climbing a ladder, hopping, exploring. And the question is whether that is a sign of confusion or a sign of someone actually finding their footing. Kim and Amy had different angles on this, and the distinction Amy draws here is one of the most practically useful things in the entire conversation. What do you say to a young adult who has changed direction 2 or 3 times and is starting to feel like something is wrong with them? Because on the other end of this is where parents would say, I think he needs to speak to someone. And that's where I would come in, or another clinician. Yeah. And how do we approach this? Go ahead. Yeah.
One job to the next makes sense. It might not, one might only be a year or 2 years, and then you're moving to something else. But you can see some trends. There's a difference between that and trying to figure out where you're headed and what's right and wrong versus just job hopping or jumping from job to job. That's, to me, again, very, very small. It seems like a small difference, but a big difference in somebody's mindset. Who you are, the effort you put in, the way you go after each one of these types of roles, events, jobs, whatever you want to call them. As long as you keep that same basis of who you are, that to me is not jumping or hopping or negative. That's finding yourself and growing.
And I would just add, from the clinical perspective, I think it is a family. And so it's something that I would look at as a family. So I shared with Amy, I was at an event yesterday, and the person, it was a founder of a health company, and he had the traditional resume of, Ivy League school, went into investment banking, had an opportunity to go join a taxi company in San Francisco in the early, whatever, 2010s. His mother said no, because you're at this, top bank. Had another opportunity, and he was miserable, had another opportunity to do something. And the parents were invested in the traditional side. Well, P.S., that taxi company became Uber. Maybe he should have gone, maybe not. But then as his third jump out of, the traditional, he then became a founder. But some of the reasons, and you were I bring this up, is you were saying the clinical side. Some of it is exploring the family dynamic, I think, perhaps from that side, because children are very much affected, I think, by making sure that their parents feel happy too. And if they're in a job that they're supposed to do, perhaps that's why they are making those shifts, because it's not who they are. And they need to, in some way, set that foundation of, I did what I was supposed to do, and now I'm doing what I'm passionate about. And as, people that want only the best for their kids and security, it's like, well, I don't know if you're going to eat if you become a founder, but that's what I want to do. It's at least that's what I've been seeing and hearing.
The distinction Amy is drawing is between a journey and chaos. A journey has a thread, even when individual steps look unrelated. You can see movement. You can see a person becoming more themselves over time. 9 times out of 10, she said, a resume tells that story if you know how to read it. Chaos is different. Chaos is leaving every role before it requires anything of you. Chaos is never letting any experience actually land. And Kim brought in something from the clinical side that I think is worth staying with. Sometimes a young person is in a job they are supposed to be in rather than one that is actually theirs. And the pivots keep happening not because they are confused, but because they are still trying to satisfy someone else's vision of what their life should look like. Kim's reference to the founder who was steered away from that early taxi startup, that taxi startup ended up becoming Uber. This is the kind of story that stays with you. Parents who invest in the traditional path at the expense of their child's instincts need to hear it. If you are a parent listening to this, that is worth sitting with. The career pivot may not be the problem. The pressure underneath it may be. I want to speak directly to the parents now, because what comes next is the part of this conversation that I think is hardest to hear and the most necessary. We have spent time talking about what Gen Z is getting wrong, and that conversation matters, but there is another conversation underneath it, one about what is happening at home before the resume gets sent, before the interview gets scheduled. I asked Kim and Amy about expectations, salary, remote work, flexibility, and whether Gen Z is being realistic about what entry level actually looks like. What started as a question about the job market became something much closer to home. Kim made a distinction I had not heard framed quite this way before, about earlier Gen Z versus the graduates coming out right now, and what COVID actually did and did not do to their relationship with work. And then Amy went somewhere that I think every parent in this audience needs to hear.
I do think that it's interesting. I think that, as I think we can all agree, there certainly COVID has a lot to do with that. I find that has become a big change in perspective of how Gen Z and just in general, people look at work, right? So that's obviously a whole nother conversation about how we look at work. But from a perspective of having more flexibility and this work balance and whatnot, I think that in general, I do think that there's these belief that you can just sort of, this is what I want to do. I'm going to work from home. And if, I want this amount of money, and there you go. So if that's not going to happen, I'm not interested in the job. And there is no doubt I get a lot of that. And I get that throughout sort of age and amount of time that people have been in the workforce. But at the same time, I am starting to see a shift, sort of back to it's time. And it's not a bad thing, because I think we can all agree that we met a lot of great people that are probably still friends of ours. And so it's great personally as well. But it's companies do work better together when you're together in a work environment and you're collaborating. I do think, though, there is a shift, and that's good. Companies are finding this sort of hybrid term that we use. But if you prove yourself, it sort of all comes back to, it's not necessarily, depending on the company, that they're making you go in every day. I have a client who he's a leader in the organization, and he's a VP and has been remote for 2 to 3 years now, because he's proven himself and he can do the work and he does the job and he still can lead and manage. So I think if that sort of proves itself out, then we're finding more gray area and ways in which it works for both the company and the employee. But I do think, stepping into it for the first time, I have to admit that I think it's not necessarily the right perspective or persona that you want to put out there, leaning into the workforce for the first time, that you need work-life balance and need to work from home.
See, that is what I'm looking to highlight for many young people and their parents. Essentially, tips like that. The focus on how to present,
right? What
to focus on, not to talk about the financial part of it too soon before you even get the job. Many are entering the interview, or even before, well, if I get it, it doesn't pay much. I don't know if I want it. And then the parent is like, well, it's very aligned with what you want to do. It's hard to find things, and they're looking, and they're a reputable company or something. So there are a lot of checks that are going, they're checking the boxes, but there's this perception, and I think that young people are doing, which it's a cognitive distortion. They're mind reading. They're anticipating, well, they're not going to want me, or they're going to want me and I'm not going to want them, or they're protecting themselves from rejection, from having to answer the difficult questions, and they're taking themselves out of the game before they get into the game, to get into the field. They're not even getting into the stadium. They're just, yeah, it's nice. That looks nice over there. But I'm not going to go for that and they make things up in their mind. So that's the cognitive distortion that I attempt to deal with young people, using every methodology that we could have, not just with CBT or acceptance and Gestalt, but we're trying to deal with some of that resistance, that self-sabotage, that what I call push-pull. You want, but you really don't want it. You're nervous. You're anxious. You don't want to deal with rejection. If they want me and I got to go through with this, and I don't really want it, but my mother is making me do this. My dad's pushing me. What am I supposed to do? We have anxiety.
I think from the work, the in-office, no in-office, it's a different, when you're looking at earlier Gen Zs versus later Gen Zs. So Gen Zs that are graduating now, yes, they were products of COVID, but they didn't graduate in COVID. So they may not have, yes, they'd like to work from home because perhaps it's more flexible, but they didn't have that as a model necessarily as students who graduated a little earlier. But what I'm seeing in terms of, I don't know, this job, some people are like, I don't want to be bored. And I think some of that is because they spend so much time, not on social media per se, but a lot of the media that they're consuming is about lives that are all fabulous. And it's about lives that, if I want something, I want it now and I can get it. And I feel because the accessibility is even more heightened than when than certainly when I came out 100 years ago, but even, people who came out, graduated 10 years ago, it's about trying to, I need to make sure I'm happy and I'm satisfied because so-and-so, look at so-and-so, they did that. They roll out of bed and everybody looks at their life and they're fabulous. And I think as parents, we understand that, or as that parents understand that there's a lot of fundamentals that go under that. And that's sort of where the tension lies, too. The friction between the two. That's all I was going to say, is that I think it's hard for them because oftentimes not everybody is living this great life, but that's what you see and that's what you're attracted to.
I would agree with that, and add to it that I think there is some enabling as well. And so I think that some parents have enabled and coddled a bit to say, oh no, we have been through COVID, and I get this, it's his life, or my child has anxiety, and I get all of that, but I do believe that there is some enabling that can unfortunately come from the parents. And that I think there is some coddling a little bit in that, again, times have changed. Let's take COVID out of it, but not what Kim's talking about, which I agree with wholeheartedly in terms of the social media and more access to seeing, what they're missing or what they can have. But I feel like all of us, or I know when I was finished with school, we're going to help you, but you're going to have to figure it out and you're going to get there. And we did you figured it out and you found a way. And I do think, unfortunately, I'm seeing more of these Gen Z now having a little bit more of that coddling and enabling. And therefore either they're saying, I have anxiety or I'm not ready to, they're not getting kicked out. They're not getting kicked out of the house as quickly. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but I feel like we're definitely in that place right now. And I think there's a variety of things that make that happen and why we're in that place.
Amy used a word I want to stay with for a moment: enabling. Not as a harsh judgment, as an honest observation from someone who sits inside the hiring process every day and watches what happens downstream from the decisions families make at home. She described it plainly. Susie is still home. The parent is complaining about it, but nothing is happening to make Susie feel like she needs to move. No fire is being lit, and the reason, often, is that the parent is managing their own anxiety about Susie's anxiety. I hear this in my clinical work constantly. The parent who says, my child has anxiety, and uses that as a reason not to create any productive pressure. Not because they don't love their child, because they are afraid of making things worse. But here is what Amy is telling you from the other side. It is not helping. The young adults who have had the latitude, who are allowed to stay comfortable without consequence, are not launching faster. They are launching slower, or not at all. The question worth sitting with is this: are you supporting your child's growth, or are you managing your own fear about their future? Because those are two very different things, and your child can feel the difference, even when they can't name it. I want to close with this section of the conversation that brings everything together. After everything we covered, what is broken? What is misaligned? What candidates are getting wrong and what parents are getting wrong? I asked Amy to set all of that aside. I asked her to speak directly to the Gen Z listener, not through the recruiter frame, not through the assessment frame. Just if you could say one thing to the young person navigating this right now, the one who is putting in the effort, feeling the pressure, and wondering whether any of this is going to work, what would it be? And then I asked about LinkedIn and about AI tools, because as you are all about to hear, all three answers lead back to the exact same place. If you can give Gen Z one piece of advice to actually succeed in today's system without losing who they are in the process, what would it be? And I'll leave it on the screen.
Yeah, I would say that be really thoughtful about what you want to do. In other words, it might not be what you majored in. It might be what you majored in college. But if you want to succeed, be true to yourself, be honest, be transparent. Don't put up a fake who you are because you think you should, or somebody told you to act a certain way or be a certain way. And also just make sure that you stay focused, because no matter what, nothing's going to come easily. And so I think that, and that I do appreciate. It's a little more difficult. It's a little more competitive. Everybody's, a lot more people are trying to get the job you want. So you have to be on your game. You have to be organized. You have to be willing to put in the effort, but don't lose who you are. and be
So stay
honest
true to
with
yourself. Yes.
and stay
Good.
true to yourself.
There's an entire industry now built around personal branding for job seekers, like LinkedIn optimization, content strategy, building a professional presence online. How much of that actually moves the needle from where you're sitting? Is there a version of it that's helping candidates versus a version that's actively working against them?
Yes, that's
Okay.
a great question.
Tell me what you think. I wanted to hear from you.
Yeah, LinkedIn now more than ever is a critical application. Yes, LinkedIn is extremely important. And I say that specifically if you're going to be in the workforce as we know it, right? That type of job. So right out of college, I tell college students this, I've worked with them. You need to have a LinkedIn profile and presence. It's extremely important. At the same time, it can hurt you or help you, as you mentioned.
Yes, yeah.
And that comes back to doing the work. You might say to yourself, well, I don't have a lot to put in my profile, but you do. Your internships, if you've hopefully, I don't care if it was a summer job, or my hope is that if you're looking for a job, and that comes back to what we were discussing earlier, that it will be in line with what your major was. So no matter what that is, you need to put a profile on LinkedIn. You also need to be thoughtful. You're not going to have a lot of jobs in there, and you might not have a lot of history, but those little pieces like the about section, be able to very quickly, with not too many paragraphs, articulate what you are looking for. And then underneath your name, put a title or what you're looking for. The reason I tell you this is because now the algorithms are really kicking into gear. And for somebody like ourselves here at Fource Recruiting, we have LinkedIn Recruiter. And LinkedIn Recruiter is a different product than LinkedIn, as we all know. So in myself as a recruiter or a company directly is searching to make hires, those words that you put into your LinkedIn profile come into play. And we're using LinkedIn Recruiter. It is used to find candidates. So it's critical.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Fource Recruiting and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, one of the things that makes Fource Recruiting, I think, unique and really helpful is that what we are doing is we're working with companies that are having difficulty making some critical hires. So it could, and by the way, these hires could be very senior people, or frankly, it is somebody who might be right out of college. It can be sales, it could be product marketing, customer success, but they might be looking for somebody who's just got a great passion or attitude or hardworking. I get that a lot. So what we're doing is we're working really hard with our clients to find candidates that fit the need and the requirements for their company. And what makes us unique is we all come from the industry. So it's different. And what we're doing is we put the human touch on it and we spend the time. And what makes us different at Fource Recruiting is we're not just blasting the marketplace and grabbing resumes and sending them off to a client. We're spending the time and we're speaking to people and we're helping them. And oftentimes I find myself doing that, helping them decide, is it the right path? Is this the right job for them? And so that's what we do. And then we're matchmakers and obviously, hopefully make some good connections. And
of course, no, very well said. AI has made it easier than ever to produce a polished resume, a strong cover letter, and a prepared interview answer. But you're on the other side of that. Can you tell us when it's been used and when it works against a candidate? When does the polish become a problem?
Again,
can you tell it's being used is what I'm asking. Yeah.
Yes, what a great question. And I have to be honest with you, and it just happened again recently with some of our
How does that impact
candidates. Yeah. It's negative.
Okay.
Companies can tell. So the AI should be used to fine tune. Again, the theme of the conversations that we're having here come into play. I want to know who you are on that piece of paper. I don't want to see something that has been written and it is very clear when it's not real and it's sadly been fine-tuned by AI. It's not representative of you and companies can pick that up. So it's not helping in any manner at all. It really isn't for either. I will also add this. It doesn't help a lot when you're planning for an interview. In other words, take a look at it, maybe get some insights on the type of questions to ask. But again, back to the example I think you gave earlier, it's very apparent when somebody's asking, especially Gen Z, to ask some questions like, where'd that come from? The value is not help it. It's sad because it's going too far. It's an extreme and clients are very frustrated with it. Again, the reason why folks like us come into play, because we've done the work and we're screening and we're talking to people. The resumes we're getting, we'll know and, send them back if they're not appropriate.
Right. Good. Well said. I'm glad you said that. Before we wrap up, I want to open the opportunity for you to provide anything that you'd like to say right now in relation to our conversation. What else would you like to add?
Yeah, that's really great. I think I'm really excited that you're having these kinds of conversations, because what I've seen and what I'm getting out of speaking to you here and spending the time is, in some ways we've evolved and in some ways we're still the same. And unfortunately or fortunately, the technology can be helpful, but it can also hurt us because it loses that human connection. And at the end of the day, whether you're a Gen Z or you're an older person looking for a job, you need to make that human connection. And you can't be lazy. You need to go through the process. You need to do the work. AI is not going to do the work for you and get you the job. And so I think that it's really important that we remember that and don't forget the human touch.
3 separate questions, 1 consistent answer. Stay true to yourself on the interview. Stay true to yourself on LinkedIn, and do not outsource your voice to AI. Because the moment you do, companies can tell, and what they are left with is a polished version of nobody. Amy made the LinkedIn point in a way I want to underline for every Gen Z listener. The algorithm is working for you or against you, depending on the words you put in your profile. LinkedIn Recruiter is how firms like Fource Recruiting find candidates who are not even actively applying. That means your profile is not just a resume, it is a search result. Treat it that way, and the AI point is worth sitting with carefully. Amy was direct. Use it to fine-tune. Use it to get a sense of what questions might come up. But the moment your cover letter, your resume, or your interview answer stops sounding like you, companies noticed, and is costing candidates opportunities they do not even know they are losing. The through line across this entire conversation is the same thing Amy said at the very end. You need to make that human connection. AI is not going to do the work for you and get you the job. Be real. Do the work. Show up as yourself. That is what gets you hired, and that is what keeps you there. In closing, what strikes me most about Kim and Amy, and what I think makes this conversation different from every other conversation happening about Gen Z and the workforce right now, is that they are not observing this from a distance. They are inside the hiring process every single day. And they have built something at Fource Recruiting that is almost counterintuitive in an industry that rewards speed and volume. They slow down enough to actually see the person in front of them. That is exactly why they have the pulse of this generation in a way that most people don't. Because Gen Z doesn't need more people who have an opinion about them. They need people who are willing to look closely enough to understand what they are actually navigating, what the pressure feels like, where the confusion is coming from, and what it would take to help them find their footing without stripping away what makes them worth hiring in the first place. Kim and Amy do that. They have been doing it for over 20 years, and this generation, whether they know it yet or not, is lucky to have people like them paying attention. To the parents listening, the job market your child is entering does not run on the assumptions you carry from your own experience of launching. The most valuable thing you can do right now is not give your child the advice you wish someone had given you. It is to get genuinely curious about what the market is actually asking for, and then trust your child enough to respond to it. To the Gen Z listener, the candidate who finds traction is not the one who is qualified more often than not. They are the ones who are more self-aware, who can walk into a room or log onto a screen and show not just what they know, but who they are and how they think. That is not something you earn in a classroom. It is something you build by being willing to be seen. Everything you need to connect with Fource Recruiting is in the show notes. If you or someone you know is navigating the job market right now, they are worth knowing about. Subscribe to Pivot Point Strategy for Change on Substack. Follow us on Spotify and YouTube. And if this episode gave you something useful, share it with someone. Share it with that one person who needs to hear it. That's how this conversation grows. The question I close with is one that I use at the end of every episode. Think about it. What's your pivot point? What's your pivot point?